Dina, did it allow you to record?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We apologize for a few technical difficulties that we were having, but we're so glad that you're with us today. Welcome to today's webinar. And my name is Kristen Kaiser. I'm faculty with JFK Partners at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. And today's topic is suicide prevention and the neurodivergent population. So please feel free to type questions or comments in the chat box anytime, and I'm going to man the chat and let Ann Moss know if we have questions. Please make sure to keep your microphone muted so that we don't hear your background noise. We're recording today's event and we'll archive it on the JFK Partners website. And we've also posted the presentation slides, and we'll add other handouts for today, which you're welcome to print or save for future reference. So following the webinar, you'll receive a link requesting an evaluation. If you could fill that out, we would so appreciate it. And you may at that time request a certificate of attendance in the evaluation. So I'm so excited to have Ann Moss Rogers with us today. And Ann goes by Ann Moss because she's a proper Southern lady. So I'll let her tell you that story a little bit. Ann Moss is a TEDx speaker, mental health and suicide education speaker, suicide loss survivor, and an award-winning author. She offers online education, speaks at conferences, universities, schools, and workplaces to fill hearts with hope while improving and saving lives. Ann Moss, we're so excited to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me and for also focusing on what is a really difficult topic. Before we get started, I did want to also put in some crisis lines, and I'm going to paste those in the chat because we're talking about some pretty difficult topics today. Mental health and suicide prevention, will be touching on self-harm, and we always want to make sure that we put the crisis resources out there so everyone knows that they are available. With 988, you can call even when you're worried about a loved one. So it doesn't have to be an emotional emergency with yourself. It could be you're worried about somebody who is having a breakdown or is having trouble with drugs or alcohol. And 741-741 is the crisis text line, and you can text them and get help as well. You can also contact both of those numbers when you are sitting there with a loved one, because a number of you aren't really going to know what to do if someone you know or love is in a suicidal crisis. You don't have to be an expert. You just need to access these numbers together, and they will guide you in what you need to do next. This is my son, Charles, and he was the funniest, most popular kid in school. Yet the funniest, most popular kid in school struggled with depression, became addicted to heroin, and killed himself in 2015. I did not think I could survive this loss. And he was the last person I would have ever thought would have taken his life. That day was a really proud mama moment. He's a sophomore on the homecoming court, which was pretty unusual. So while he had some neurodivergent personality traits, he wasn't on the spectrum. And he was enormously popular, and my older son actually won that year. And I think from a lot of perspective of other parents sitting in the stands, I think they were looking down at me that day thinking, man, she has it made. What a great family. And I had a great family. I'm not going to say I didn't, but our family was in absolute chaos at the time. So what you saw from the outside on that day was not what was going on the inside. It wasn't long after this picture was taken that my son's drug use started to escalate. And I didn't know why. turns out drugs and alcohol were his antidote to numbing pain and thoughts of suicide. I didn't know any of that. In fact, I didn't know that people use drugs and alcohol to numb thoughts of suicide. It makes sense to me now. But all I saw was a young man who just suddenly and all was just diving into all these substances, and not just alcohol and marijuana, but things like robo-tripping and kratom and all sorts of things that I'd never even heard of. We ended up using all available resources in town, and we were seeing a social worker or a counselor, my husband and I, because we didn't know, is this mental illness? Is this substance misuse? You know, what are we looking at? And I remember asking for a psychological evaluation. No, I didn't ask. I asked for a diagnosis. And they never gave me one. And they told me I didn't need one. And that's not true. I did. And it was called a psychological evaluation. And I wish I would have asked with those very words, because we were cut out of a lot of local programs because we didn't have a diagnosis on a piece of paper that said psychological evaluation. So what they did was that they recommended that we kidnap our son out of his bed and take him to a wilderness program. Now, you don't do that because you've caught your kid with a beer and a joint. You do that because you think your child's life is truly at risk, and his was. I can't tell you today that this was the right move, but I can tell you I didn't feel like we had any other choices, and I thought my child was going to die. Now, I didn't think he was going to die by suicide. I thought he was going to die by overdose. And he started to be very reckless and take a lot of chances. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, he's going to die doing all that. Thinking that he had no idea. And that was the point. He thought, well, I don't care. So he started taking a lot of risks. And taking a lot of risks is actually one of the factors of depression. So he's in wilderness, and guess what they did for $32,000 is that they did a psychological evaluation, which, by the way, I could have gotten at home for a $50 copay that people said that I didn't need. Of course, they saw that as a need right from the get-go. And it turned out that he did have depression. So he was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, ADHD combined type, which we already knew about. And then he had something they called cannabis dependence. And that would later segue into substance use disorder. So in terms of what neurodiversities he had, ADHD, he had something I have called dyscalculia, which is basically dyslexia, but with numbers. So we have a hard time finding directions. If it wasn't for the GPS, I would be perpetually lost. And so would Charles. In fact, Charles is even worse. If you put him in a box, put cookie crumbs to a ladder on the way out, he would have a hard time finding it. Then he would eventually become addicted. And he had a sleep disorder from the time he was about 18 months old called delayed sleep phase syndrome. And that sleep disorder, I believe, is one of the things that really contributed to his depression. And we never really found any really good answers to that. So a lot of people watching today, he had multiple layers of issues that at any given time, we were trying to figure out, well, which one is it right now? So he would go to a therapeutic boarding school after wilderness, another step we couldn't afford. But guess what? Our home equity loan could. And he would come home from the therapeutic boarding school some 22 months, and he had been in some kind of placement for about 22 months. And he came home and he was pretty angry, but Charles was really, really cuddly and loving and thoughtful. So he couldn't be but so mad all the time. Unfortunately, he went right back to using drugs and alcohol because that had been his coping strategy, and he didn't develop or use the new ones he learned while he was away. And I mean, I lived 10 months in a house with a child using heroin and didn't know it. And that made me feel really stupid. But then when I did discover it, we didn't really have time to absorb it because the police would call us and tell us they wanted to meet us in the parking lot of a restaurant where we were eating dinner. And then they broke the news that they had found our child dead that morning. And they told us it was a suicide and the method left no question. And I wondered, how could I be such a crummy mother that my child would leave me that way? And it was because I didn't understand suicide. And it would be a really long time before I would. And I really didn't think I could survive this loss. But I did. And the one thing I told myself to make it from 1 hour to the next was, it's bad as it is now, and it was brutal. It'll never be as bad as getting the news. That part is over, and it will never hurt that much again. You know, we were a normal family. We did normal family things. We went to the beach. We played slip and slide. We had backyard barbecues. I coached basketball. My husband coached baseball. We had bonfires and sleepovers and did roller coasters and played board games. And after he died, what I realized is that I was focusing on the 5% of parenting I did imperfectly, ignoring the 95% that I did right. And what I would like to know from you all today is how many of you do that as a parent or as a clinician or a clinician to be now? How many of you focus on that part and not really give yourself any credit for the great work and all the love that you do offer and your compassion? And I hope you give yourself a break with that. So I'm struggling, and I'm looking at my first death anniversary. And I thought I had been doing really well, but right before that first death anniversary, which was June, I am really struggling. And so I did what I usually did is I went to my blog and I wrote a piece called The Final 48 Hours. And it's about getting the news and blow by blow what happened, what they said, you know, the emotional, just really ugly blow by blow of how we felt getting the news. And I thought nobody is ever going to want to read this, but hundreds of thousands came to the site. And part of the reason was I'd written a newspaper article that had gone viral the previous month. So I had this audience that I wasn't quite used to or really didn't know that I had. Somebody took that article and they shared it on Facebook, and a young lady found it, and her name is Lauren. And she wrote me a note, and it said, 2 days ago, I thought about taking my life, but reading a post from a mother who's felt such devastating pain has changed my perspective on life. And she then reached out to her own parents and she asked for help. What I want you to understand from that is something I didn't get until then. And that's the fact that people want to tell. So oftentimes we think of suicide as being this clandestine secret that nobody wants to tell, when most of the time people want desperately to tell. She'd been wanting to tell for years, but she was afraid of how it would be taken, or that she wasn't strong enough, or how would they react. And that article was sort of that piece of self-discovery that allowed her to see it from a different perspective. Now, I'm going to tell you, if I was sitting across from Lauren and I said, "What about your family? How could you do that to them?" that would have shamed her. And that would not have been the appropriate response. But what you can do if you're talking to somebody who is struggling with suicide and they actually mention somebody, their dog, their mother, their sister, you mentioned your sister. Why don't you tell me more about her? That's an invitation for you to ask more. We don't ever want to guilt or shame people out of their thoughts of suicide, because they don't want them in the first place. They're not going seeking out suicidal thoughts. Suicidal thoughts just happen to hit certain brains. So we're going to talk a little bit about mental health and self-harm. And we're going to start with the mental health piece. So this is how we're conditioned to look for depression, which is actually one of the most common reasons that somebody would be suicidal, is they live with depression. But not everybody that lives with depression has suicidal thoughts. Not everybody who thinks about suicide is actually got major depression. But anytime you look for that sad person, that's not always what you're going to see. And with our neurodiverse population, it's often not what you're going to see, because they want to mask it, right? This is what I saw. Fun, happy-go-lucky, absolutely joyous, constantly surrounded by friends kind of kid. Sometimes you'll see nothing because they isolate, and all of a sudden you wonder, where did they go? How come I'm not seeing them anymore? And this could be a friend, this could be a child. But if someone is ghosting you, it is usually not because of you, but because of something they're going through. It can look like anger and irritability. So I want you to know that that face of depression doesn't always look like what it says, depression. Especially when we're talking about the neurodiverse community. And what we see a lot is masking. And I'm going to play a video in a second from a mom whose child did a lot of masking, but I'll tell you, mine did too. And he ended up actually writing a piece of music, says, "I wear the mask of a clown. I feel so unloved from the monster created from drugs." So that smile and that laughter was hiding a lot of pain that he kept very carefully in place. And if you be patient with me for a second, I am going to share this video that I hope I can find very quickly. Advanced video. And this video is from my friend Judy. One second. Well, it played well a while ago. Ah, there we go. Masking.
Like many autistic people, has learned since he was little to mask. And that's what makes it, in my opinion, so hard for parents or other people to catch it, is because they don't mean to be deceptive. That is not their goal in masking. Their goal in masking is to not show you who they are because they know that they are different. And so they want to be normal. They want to blend in, and they want to present like they don't have all the problems that they feel. The anxiety is usually a big one. Anxiety is huge just from the pressure of wanting to have, be that person who is the life of the party, or who is whatever they perceive as what they would like to present as. So that makes it really difficult.
Now, I did kind of edit the first of that out because I didn't want to reveal the name of her son. But her son did have a suicide attempt. Like a lot of people who are neurodiverse, he came in contact with the law. The law didn't understand him. He ended up in jail. And he tried to take his life in jail. Now, if you are in jail and you tell them that you are suicidal, they will take off all your clothes. They will take all your sheets off the bed, and you will sleep naked on a cot. And for a population that is very sensitive to sights and sounds and all that sort of stuff, that can really add to their distress. So we're going to touch on self-harm. And a lot of people don't really understand self-harm, but from having had a blog on the internet as long as I have, a lot of neurodiverse kids have reached out to me. And it was back in 2010 when I started to see that a lot of the kids asking for mental health services, I was on a mental health board, and I was the one in charge of overseeing our applications. And so that was basically all of our case studies. And I started to see this correlation between being on the spectrum or having ADHD and mental health issues and suicide. And it would be at least 10 more years before we started to see data and studies that actually showed that connection. So I think in this population, what we see most of the time is they don't know how to express their feelings to others. And I'm going to give you an example of what one of the young ladies that we email probably 4 to 5 times a week, and she's neurodiverse. She is 24 years old, and she wants so badly to fit in and have friends. And so it's mostly kind of coaching. And she's getting ready to go to the doctor, and she wrote this in a note the other day and gave me permission to use it. I explained that for me, I self-harm because I don't know how to express my feelings. When somebody cuts themselves and they see blood and they feel pain, that pain they get and understand, it makes all this intangible stuff happening in your brain more tangible, in a place that people get and understand. So what can you say? I couldn't help but notice the burns or scars on your arms, legs, or whatever. Can you tell me more about what you might be going through? When you say it that way, you're being empathic and compassionate. You're not shaming someone out of the behavior, because most of them aren't really sure how to fix it. They don't want to be doing it. And it shows that you are with them in this journey, that you understand they're struggling with something, and you want to have a conversation. We always want to ask with curiosity and compassion. We never want to ask with shame and judgment. So I have some self-harm, this ebook. I'm going to put this in the chat. If you go to the second link, you'll get all of the resources that I will mention today, including that self-harm safety box. It is just a really single strategy guide. And what I like about it is it gives the child agency in the process. And lots of times we take them to the doctor, or we do this or that, and this makes them part of helping themselves, which is something we really want to do, because guess what? One day, most of the kids, and I know not all, will be on their own, and they'll have to manage their own mental health. And I know that's not the case for everybody on today's call, but it is for a lot of them. So we're going to take a closer look at suicide. A lot of people think, and I would love to know if you think this, how many of you think that talking about suicide plants the idea in someone's head? I'm going to tell you that it doesn't do that. Yes, thank you, false. That is true, it does not. Talking helps always. Thank you all. I'm so glad you know that. Because a lot of people are still holding on to this myth that it really allows people to open up and say, oh, they're having a conversation. I can talk about this. We also don't want to use the word committed with the word suicide. In 1300s England, it was, but today it is considered a public health issue by the National Institute of Mental Health and the Department of Defense. Therefore, we want to say suicided, died by suicide, ended his life, killed himself. Now, I used him, but it could be her, them, whatever pronouns that individual is using. So issues that might heighten risk for suicide in the neurodiverse community. Big one, lack of connection, because I think connection really is the linchpin of suicide prevention. Mental health issues. Lots of times people have ADHD or some type of impulsivity. Maybe that impulsivity is the result of trauma or something else. Bullying or being bullied. Unemployment. And I got a real quick story on that. We have a member of our suicide loss support group, and one of our members lost both a brother and her mother to suicide. And she was left to care for a sister who's on the spectrum. She worked somewhere at a drugstore, and her sister also wanted to work in the drugstore, but she wanted to work in the back stocking where no one would see her. But they refused to hire her because she couldn't smile. And, she didn't have a customer-facing job. And this member didn't want to kick up a fuss because she needed that job. She no longer, her mom had a lot of debt. So a lot of the estate went to that debt. I mean, she couldn't afford to lose the job. LGBTQ issues or people of color. So if you have somebody on the spectrum, LGBTQ, and is a person of color, they're definitely at higher risk. Family history or exposure to suicide in a school environment, for example. And overall systems that don't understand neurodiverse people. And they didn't understand my son, that's for sure. And his neurodiversities were different than autism, but I do know that they just didn't get him ever. So it has to do with health history and environment. So first of all, the main risk, the health factors, including biological and psychological aspects of the person's health, historical factors or things that happened in the person's life or family's past history. So if a father has died by suicide or a grandfather has died by suicide, that increases risk. And not because the child knows, it just tends to run in families. And then you have your environmental factors, which are really the psychosocial factors, including bullying and cultural factors and access to lethal means. That means guns and prescriptions and things like that. All these risk factors can kind of collide at one time. So I'm going to show you an example of how one young man described his suicidal intensity. His was about 20 minutes long, and I'm going to tell you by no means is this the epitome of what everybody suffers with suicidal thoughts. However, it was how he described it, and since then I've had other people agree with this. His continuum was about 20 minutes long, which is about average. And he would start feeling those suicidal thoughts, and he described it as kind of a trance-like state. And then at the top of that first curve, he really, really wanted to end it. And then after about 60 to 90 seconds, that would drop off and he'd feel more ambivalent. And then at the second peak, he really wanted to end it. And he felt like he was a burden, that the only way he could end his pain was to end his life. And then it dropped off again because no feeling is permanent. And then he would kind of come out of it and describe that he felt like he kind of had a hangover afterwards, even though he had taken nothing and had nothing to drink. So there was this young lady on a bridge, and she calls me one night. And she told me she was suicidal. And I could tell she was just somewhere else in her head. And you really just kind of listen and talk and ask questions. And the way I knew she was coming out of it was that she says, "I'm cold." Well, she'd been standing on a bridge, 19 degrees. It was windy. She had no coat on, but it was once she said, "I'm cold," that I'm like, bingo, she's coming out of it. And I said, "Why don't you get back in your car? Because you got a heater in your car." So I finally kind of talked her back into the car. And then a friend of mine said, "Well, why didn't you call 911? Well, first of all, I wasn't sure what bridge she was on. And then as we're talking in that 20 to 30 minutes, I kind of figured out which bridge. I wasn't sure. And I didn't call 911 because she had had a previous altercation with the police on a suicidal call, and it did not go well. And my fear was that had I called the authorities, she would have gone over the railing. And I thought that I just made a judgment call because I wasn't sure where she was. And that happened to be a good call. Although it really could have gone either way, and sometimes you just don't know. So oftentimes people think of suicide as a choice, but it's really something people are driven to in a moment of extreme pain when they don't have as much self-control as they normally might. And brains are different in those with suicidal thoughts, specifically in the areas of stress response and impulse control. And it's never caused by one thing. So here's some red flag behaviors. They isolate and avoid sudden behavior changes. They fall asleep. Here's one my son showed a lot: frequent flyer to the doctor, frequent flyer to the school nurse. So if you have kids that are constantly going to the school nurse and you know that school nurse by first name, if you have younger kids, then oftentimes that, that's a signal that maybe we better intervene and get a psychological evaluation and see what's going on. Older adults will be the ones to go to the doctor a lot, or they may be going to the ER, urgent care, a lot. Angry, irritable, violent. So we have those who are bullying others. In this population, it's usually the opposite, but know that bullies are just as high as a risk as those who are bullied. Feeling sad, frequent absences, giving away prized possession, self-harm and drug use starts to escalate, and reckless behavior. Now, I want to go back to that sudden behavior change, because a lot of times if somebody's been really sad and you see, oh my gosh, they look really good, they look really happy, any sudden change, even from sad to happy, which we think, oh, wow, they're doing much better, can be a signal that we need to intervene. So what might people say? I want to die. I feel so worthless. I feel so numb. I'm such a burden. I can't do this anymore. I feel so overwhelmed. In this population, and this is anecdotal, when they come to me, they always say, I want to die. They may follow it up with those other things, but they're usually pretty direct. Some of them will tell me, I told somebody and they didn't believe me. So when somebody's really direct, nobody believes them. When they're indirect, nobody believes them. When they're subtle, nobody believes them. So we need to take this very seriously. And I'm curious, have any of you heard anybody say any of these phrases? I like what Michelle says, sudden behavior changes that repeat or continue at what frequency, number of days. It's really like they were feeling sad yesterday, but all of a sudden today, they're elated. Now, we have people who are bipolar, right? And they may be rapid cyclers, and that might be kind of part of their whole thing. But when we have normal people who've been in a depressive episode, they usually come out of that slowly. So and anytime somebody is on the path to healing, that's never so quick as to be like on top of the world the next day. And the reason that behavior is a red flag is that oftentimes it means they've set a date to kill themselves. They've already made a plan. So the younger ones say, what do they say? I want to go see grandma. And this is, grandma's died, and they think heaven is a better place, and they think I need to go see her. I want to run in front of a car. They don't know why they want to go run in front of a car. All they know is that's the way they feel. They need to go do that. I am ugly and I have no friends. Now, one time saying this, don't be alarmed. But if you see repeated patterns of phrases like this, I hate myself, that self-deprecating language, this is an opportunity to intervene early. This is an opportunity to turn that trajectory before it ever gets to crisis. And that's what we want to do, right? I owned a digital marketing company, and a friend of mine came in one day, and she used to work for me, and she goes, I took my son, Sean, to the doctor. I told him about my concerns. He was saying the last 2-3 things: I'm ugly, I have no friends, I hate myself, on a regular basis. The doctor was like, oh, he'll grow out of it. And she said, I don't know, my gut tells me I should be concerned. And I said, you're right, you should be. So we had a discussion. I gave her some resources. She went to a therapist, and they did something called filial therapy. And it's a parent, and it has playing games. He absolutely loved it, was very engaged with it. So come about middle school, we met again. She called me. She said, I want to talk. And so we met again. And she goes, I don't know what to do about middle school. I'm really worried. The public school this. And I said, I think he needs to go to a private school. And she goes, we can't afford it. I said, whatever you can do, ask your parents. The smaller the school, but not one that is so academically demanding. One that where he feels like being an individual is okay. So they managed to do that. And she reached out right before we went to high school last year and said that, you know, they've had to intervene, they've had to stay with a counselor. It's been a lot of work, but that he was really thriving. And his first year in high school went really, really well. Early intervention works, folks. So
And Moss, can I interrupt you for a second? You just
absolutely.
have two great comments. One from Elizabeth, who said, my daughter has expressed not being able to stop the suicidal thoughts. She's called her therapist to learn ways to stop the thoughts. And I think you are going to cover that in the rest of your presentation. Some of those strategies. But then also Laura had said she heard one of those phrases from one of her loved ones very often, but he doesn't accept help. How can you help someone who doesn't accept the help, even though you've offered it?
Well, we can't make somebody, accept help. However, if you're seeing these behaviors and you say, I'm going to go get help, and you go get help, you go to a group or you go to a therapist yourself, and maybe at one point you're in that therapist and you come home and go, I'm trying to work on this, and my therapist has suggested that members of my family attend with me to help me learn to manage some of the anxiety I feel around this. And that's just a way for them to go to the therapist to help you, which they may be more willing to do. My son didn't want a lot of help, and when he was given help, he didn't really engage. And the only thing he was really interested in was this anxiety workshop that he never got in because he didn't have the diagnosis, and then a rap class that didn't last very long, unfortunately. The one not being able to stop the suicidal thoughts. Some people live with suicidal thoughts their whole life, and they learn a way to manage them, and then some of them grow out of it. So it just depends where she is. There is a book called Loving Someone with Suicidal Thoughts, and it's written by Stacy Friedenthal. And I would highly recommend that book if you are actively living with somebody with suicidal thoughts. So, we can't control their thoughts, but we can figure out over time where they're coming from and be more empathic in that. And in the some of the resources, I've got ways to have that conversation, and I can't cover all that today, but it is in the resource ebook, and it's the one with the yellow cover.
And Moss, I just also wanted to interject and say, with my own neurodivergent children with autism, we have also experienced suicidal ideation and other things, but I think having really open conversations when they were younger, and having normalized that as in our family, that's something that we can bring up and talk about, means that as they've gotten older, if I'm concerned or I see something curious, I can ask, are you feeling safe with your body? Are you having suicidal thoughts? And they can be honest about it because they know what that looks like because we've been through it before. So I do think there's an element of normalizing the conversations when our kids are younger, experiencing some of these and saying some of these things. that we're addressing it so that it just is part of our family vernacular.
Right. Well, what I liked is that you did have that code word. And your code word is, I don't feel safe in my body. One young lady would like to come home and say, Mom, I want to paint my toenails blue. And that was her way of saying, because she got tired of saying, I'm suicidal, or the parents saying, are you suicidal? So she let her child pick the phrase by saying, are your toes blue today? And then also found ways to give your child their power back by saying, I feel so anxious today and I'm not handling this very well. Can you just give me a random hug? When they do that, they're going to feel you turn to absolute jelly, and they're going to realize they do have power. And it's just a way of giving them an agency in that process. So anytime you can give them agency with the phrase, the hug, and allowing them to help you resolve some issue or give you a suggestion. You know, I'm feeling really anxious about this presentation. Do you think I should do this or that? Should I wear this or this? But again, that just kind of starts to give them their power back because they feel really helpless in this situation. So I'm going to show you what my son actually put up on social media. If I died, no one would notice for at least a month. Death sounds nice. And he actually did talk about death a whole lot. And I didn't even know what to say to that when he would talk about death all the time. And I know now I should have said, what makes you talk about that so much? Tell me more about that. Again, asking with curiosity, because sometimes kids who talk a lot about death are thinking a lot about death, and it's their way of kind of getting you to ask them more about it. So, what do you ask if you want to know if someone is thinking of suicide? And it's gone blurry again. Does anybody know what that might be? I'm going to give you just a second. Think about it. So it's really not as much what you say or you ask, but it's more about listening. But the actual question is, adults, teens, and tweens, is, are you thinking of suicide? If you want to know if someone is thinking of suicide, you do not ask, are you thinking of harming yourself? You ask, are you thinking of suicide? Or are you thinking of killing yourself? You got to be very, very direct. So what do you ask a younger kid, younger child that may not even know what the word suicide means, or may not even have a mature concept of death? Are you thinking of making yourself dead? They get that. They may not get the word suicide, but they'll get that. Now, it can be more complicated to kind of find out what their concept of death is, and that's a whole presentation in itself. But this will at least get you the answer that you need initially. You don't want to minimize feelings, convincing them life is worth living, or fix it. I mean, we're parents, a lot of us, and we want to fix it, right? But we can't. And we start to feel helpless and realize our own shortcomings, which is actually really difficult to manage too. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So I want you to say something like, tell me more about how you feel, instead of, you have so much to live for. When we say you have so much to live for, it's like we're dismissing their pain. And that's not what we want to do. So we want to really tell me more about how you feel. And then what we want to do is shut up. Allow for those long stretches of silence. With the neurodiverse population in particular, they need time to process. And that time to process is going to happen when we're not diving in lecturing. I'm grateful you shared this with me. I know it was hard. Instead of, you got this, you got to stop talking like that. Here's a trend I've noticed. Kids don't feel seen. Adults don't feel seen. They don't feel heard. With this advent of digital and social media, people are more aware that they're 1 in a billion, whereas it used to be once you were a neighborhood or a church, our worlds were not this huge. And now that we've got this big digital world, people feel like there's so much noise that they're not seen or heard. So allowing someone to feel heard is really the greatest gift we can offer. And while it's really easy to do, it can be really tough too, because we want to tell them we love them and we want to say, you have so much to live for, when that's not the thing we should say. And let's say you do say that. Back up and go, oh God, I can't believe I said that. I'm going to shut up now and stop saying things like that. Make fun of yourself. Have fun with it. You can back up. You're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. It's really all about connection. As technology has become a bigger part of our lives, our communities are not as connected, and our kids aren't getting the FaceTime they used to. And I mean face-to-face, real, right across the table from each other. And as a result of that, they're not building as much resilience. And therefore, we need to kind of change our parenting styles in our schools and become more of a wisdom guide and really take that sort of punitive parenting off the table, because this generation of kids just really isn't responding to it. So when are people most vulnerable? We are coming up on spring break. So if you have kids in school, that's actually a transition time, and that is when kids are more vulnerable, when they're leaving somewhere or coming back. Leaving for summer break or coming back. Let's say you're an adult and you're in the military. It would be when somebody is deployed or coming home. And I don't mean just the person who's deployed, but the entire family, because that's a big transition. Moving, changing schools, changing jobs, going from working to retirement. Those are all big transitions. And then we got the little ones in between. And then we have relationship disruptions. What does that mean? Well, relationship disruptions are death of a loved one, fight with a loved one. It could be a breakup, a child is going through a parent getting a divorce, or that person is getting a divorce. So a romantic breakup as well. Those relationship disruptions are really big. Now, I want to say that these are sort of those last straw events that push people who are already vulnerable to suicide towards suicide. So they're not like one thing that happens, you know, they had a romantic breakup, therefore that person died by suicide. Well, there's breakups all over the world all the time, and people don't die by suicide. There had to be other risk factors happening at the same time. And that one was just the last straw event that drove them towards thinking they're worthless and they needed to end their lives. So here's a summary of what to do. Have a conversation, listen, ask the question, connect with help. You are not supposed to fix this. All you want to do is be the bridge to the person so they can get the help that they need. 911 is now a last resort. I mean, if you're in a rural community and it is the only place to get a suicide risk assessment, that's going to be your only choice. But just know that you'll need to explain and advocate for your child because they may not understand the neurodiverse personality. You can also call 988 together, like I mentioned before. If someone's taken a medication, you got to call you got to call 911. That's an emergency. Trust the process. Don't focus on the outcome. What you excuse me. What you're looking for is a suicide risk assessment and a safety plan. And I'm going to show you what a safety plan is because it's not this big mysterious document that everyone seems to think it is. So in the packet of resource materials today, I'm going to put that link in here again. I have a packet or PDF of a bunch of different safety plans, from traditional to ones done on index cards. This one in front of you now is actually a safety plan for a neurodiverse young adult with a lot of layers of issues, of mental health issues. My favorite thing to do, and I do this at colleges and high schools, is to do a coping card. And it's, you know, reasons for living, coping strategies, 2 trusted adults, a couple of crisis resources, and the backside is your book of wins or your accomplishments. The neurodiverse community will often struggle with what are your reasons for living. So they either need a little bit more time to process that, or you ask them, what things have kept you alive in the past? And I'm going to paste that in the chat as well. This is one of my most popular downloads, and it is also at the mentalhealthspeakers.net link. So I've done this a long time, and now my pages are ranked. And I have a video that's been seen 85,000 times on YouTube. The only way they can find it is if they're looking up a specific way to kill themselves. So it's a how-to video, and I'm not going to say the title. That's the only way they can find it. And they do find it, and it doesn't give directions. It's actually clickbait that saves lives, is one way one kid put it. But what I love is that sometimes they'll come back to me years later and tell me that, you know, they, out of the vastness of the universe and the internet, they posted on this one video and somebody answered them. And they'll come back 2 years later and say, you know what, that just because you listened and answered me when I thought nobody cared, that made a difference. And that's how important listening is. So I keep these. So I have my coping card too. And this is on the back of my coping card, is this comment. Because some days I'm really struggling. You know, I'm like, I don't matter. They didn't take my contract. I'm worthless. You know, what I do doesn't matter. And I go back and I look, and I actually have a secret page on my website where I have put about 100 of these, because sometimes I need that validation. This is the coping card activity at that same link. So when you go to the ER, it'll usually be the Ask Suicide Screening tool. And we're trying to get more pediatricians and internists to do this validated screening tool. And it's very straightforward. In the past few weeks, have you wished you were dead? And it's, however, what is happening now is that this man is looking to see if we need to change that for those with an ASD diagnosis? Do we need to use a different screening tool, or is this one gonna work? It's very direct, so I would assume so, but that study's still underway. And if you want to read studies on autism and suicide, Paul Lipkin, MD, is your guy. He knows everything, and I've read a lot of his work. Remember that masking makes it harder to see. Neurodiverse have challenges in stress response and emotional regulation. They need more time to process, so doing a safety plan is going to take longer. Doing a risk assessment and doing even the screening tool is going to take more time. And they have, they have trouble communicating their emotions. So I'm going to talk about restricting access to means, and that means removing certain things from your home that can be easily used for suicide, because in that suicidal process that we saw earlier, one of the things is that we want to put time between thought and action, because that thought process doesn't last forever. We want to clear out or restrict access to medications. We want to go to take back. We want to do lock boxes, and we want to limit even the over-the-counter medications. If you buy blister packs, pushing the pills out of the blister packs, by the time they push out enough pills, the feeling has left them. And in the UK, when they did that, suicide risk or suicide attempts went down 43%. We don't have that in the US, so I would replace with really small quantities. And don't buy Tylenol at all, because that can cause long-term liver damage. They can die from overdosing on Advil. They can die from overdosing on Tylenol, and Tylenol is the more frequent one. And I'm going to share this video with you. So let me do that again, share screen. It's going to take a second.
I said, I have a safe that I bought from a doctor that he used in his office to keep prescription meds in. It's now in my garage. It has the old dial code thing where there's no key, there's no way to bust into it. I said, if he is prescribed anything that he could use to kill himself, that will go in the safe. Yeah, Tylenol, everything has to go in the safe. And by the way, tell your people not to buy a cheap safe off of Amazon for $50, because I did that back in the day when he was more actively suicidal and had prescription meds that he could have taken. And what I found out is he learned on YouTube how to pop right in the center on the top. It pops the lock open, and he got the meds out.
So don't get a cheap safe. I did that. I got the cheap safe, and guess what? My son got in it and got the drugs that were in it.
And Moss, there's another question for you.
Oh, thank you.
And I think we should wrap up in a few minutes so that we have time for some Q&A.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump right to that one next. Let's see. I'm not a mental health professional, but I work with people that have made these statements, and then I listen. Am I qualified to do this quick assessment tool, or do I direct them to getting connected to a community mental health services, which takes a long time? It's okay if you ask the question. It's okay if you use that tool. Then you know, and then when you connect with the mental health professional, you can give them the results of that. Sometimes people will tell you more than they will tell someone else. So if you start to, so if you say, how are you thinking of killing yourself? Once you have that information, you can make sure that that firearm is not in the house, that whatever drug they had. There are things you can do to limit the access they have to whatever they said they would use to kill themselves. That question is okay to ask. It's not mandatory. And if it's like too uncomfortable, you don't have to. But know that your loved one sometimes will tell you more than they will tell the stranger, but sometimes they'll tell the stranger more. So it depends on the person. So yes, you can do a safety plan, and yes, you can use that tool. And it is the Ask Suicide Screening Tool, ASQ, and I'll go write that in here, ASQ. We want to lock up all firearms. Suicides make up 76% of all firearm deaths in Colorado. And I think it's really important that if you're a firearm owning family and you know that there is risk in your household at that time, ask somebody else to sort of babysit that firearm. So I'm going to just show some quick resources. And one is the podcast that Kristen and I did, and that's also in the resources. It's taken me a lot of wonderful places, but we're going to skip through that and we're going to go right to, I would love to hear one thing you learned today in the chat, if you would share that with me. It's one way after I kind of have an emotional crash. It kind of helps me fill me back up. And I am ready to take questions.
Marcella had an interesting comment too. I don't know if you can see.
Let's see.
About a disabled veteran's access to guns.
Oh yeah. What I've found with veterans, if they kind of have a buddy system. So when I've talked to veterans, they'll say, we've got 2 to 5 guys and we check in with each other every Monday. And then, and we're really honest with each other. We made that pledge. And when one of us is not doing well, the other will go and take the barrel of the gun or the firing pin of a shotgun, and we'll just babysit that, because they often have a very emotional attachment to their weapons. And that's a way to say, you still have this weapon, we're just disabling it temporarily. And one veteran, what he would do during the winter is he would take the key to the safe, put it in a bucket, fill it with water, freeze it, and put it in its deep freezer. So that would keep him from accessing his weapons when he was struggling. So I work with people with disabilities, as information will be really helpful to bring to the families I work with. Is there any way to connect with you for maybe rearrange a presentation in the future? You bet. There is my email. Also in that, that resource kit, and the reason I put it in an email, because it is a lot of stuff. It's a lot of ebooks. It's a lot of articles, and really anything I've mentioned. So it's got like 13 things in it. It may be total overkill, but I like for people to have access to those resources. You all are really very accessible. I do a lot on grief. I do a lot on suicide prevention. I do a lot on coping strategies, and also drug trends that we're seeing that may be disruptive as well. Does anybody have any other questions? Oh, thank you, Jacqueline. I really love all these. You all have to send this the chat to me.
We will. It's lovely.
because I don't think I saw all of them. And I'm sorry at the beginning we had so many and that the slides were a little blurry. There's like something I need to go in and check. And after this is done, I'm going to go find where that thing is.
Do you have any other questions for Ann Moss today? Looks like you're just getting lots of comments, which is wonderful.
And I'm going to tell you, I'm more of a suicide prevention expert than I am in the neurodiverse space, but I've seen so many applications. And when I was writing my second book, at first I wasn't allowed to put in that it was a connection until I found the data, and it came out right when we were writing it. Because I was like, what do you mean? Oh, because all these parents and all these kids have been reaching out to me for like 10 years.
Anecdotally, yeah. Actually, Ann Moss, Rick Padilla would love to know if you have resources for suicide loss survivors.
Yes, I do. If you could email me, did I put in that?
You did put your email in.
Yes, I do. I run a group. And I'm going to be speaking at American Association of Suicidology in Las Vegas this year to suicide loss survivors. So I speak to suicide loss survivors and people who've lost a child, mostly. Those two groups. So yeah, I got a ton of resources for that too, and I would love to share them with you.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ann Moss, for being with us today and talking about such a difficult topic and so vitally important. I know that when we had a chance to speak on my podcast, You Don't Want to Hug, we had a really amazing conversation, and it really touched my heart for a long time. And I know that we both thought about it for a long time afterwards. There's something pretty powerful about connecting over these topics and thinking about how to support our neurodiverse loved ones when they're really, really in pain. So thank you so much for sharing your heart and your story and all these wonderful resources. And for our guests today, just remember that you're going to get a link in your email to fill out an evaluation. And once you do that, you'll also be able to request a certificate of being part of this presentation. So thank you very much. And then I will share my podcast. Thank you, Audrey. And I think also it's in Ann's resources.
Yes, and here's the specific episode we did. I actually had that in my notes. Yay, Moss.
Oh, cool. Thank you, Ann Moss.
And it's really good. And I tell you why it's really, really good is because her son Jameson does a bit at the end. So you hear from someone who has struggled and come out of it, which is so valuable. And if you have young neurodiverse patients, I would play that for them. I
Thank
would.
you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.